That day everything seemed perfect. 10 years of marriage, an entire decade marked by highs and lows, by promises and forgiveness. I believed that night would be a celebration of our story. The table was set with candles, wine glasses, and a cake that read, 10 years of love. I smiled as I watched my wife descend the stairs in a red dress that always reminded me of the beginning of everything. I truly believed that this would be one of the happiest moments of our lives. But what happened next changed everything. In the middle of dinner, amidst laughter and toasts, my wife stood up, picked up a small wrapped box, and approached our daughter. "You deserve the world, my dear," she said with a smile. Inside the box was an envelope. Our daughter tore open the paper and began to read aloud. "Round-trip ticket to Paris, 2 weeks of international travel, all expenses paid." The room filled with applause. Everyone was celebrating the generous gift, but I stood there, waiting for her to say something like, "And of course, let's all go together." But it never came. She simply placed her hand on our daughter's shoulder, proudly, as if I didn't exist there. A lump formed in my throat. The words stuck in my throat. This wasn't just a gift, it was a message. Behind her smile there was something cold, a distance I hadn't noticed before, a kind of calculated joy, like someone taking the first step in a carefully planned scheme. In that instant, I realized that this trip represented more than a surprise. It was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand, but was about to discover. There was a time when I believed that love was enough. I remember the first day I saw my wife. She was laughing with a group of friends at college, and the sound of that laughter stayed with me. It was one of those encounters that seem like the work of destiny, glances that meet, and suddenly, the world seems to shrink until it fits into a single instant. We were young, dreamers, and we believed that the future would be kind to us. The early years were simple, almost poetic. We shared everything from a small rented apartment to hopes for a better future. I worked double shifts to pay the bills while she finished her studies. Sometimes I'd arrive home late at night, my hands dirty with grease and my body exhausted, but a hug from her was enough to make it all worthwhile. I promised myself that one day I would give her everything she dreamed of, a comfortable home, stability, and a life without worries. When our daughter was born, it was as if the world gained new colors. We spent nights awake, taking turns breastfeeding and dreaming about the future of that little one. She said I was the most devoted man she knew, and I believed her. I made silent sacrifices, giving up trips, friends, personal dreams, all in the name of family. Over the years, I thought we were building something solid. Each achievement seemed like another brick in our story. The photos on the wall showed genuine smiles, simple trips, family Sundays. But now looking back, I realized that perhaps I confused routine with love, comfort with complicity. What once seemed perfect may have been just an illusion sustained by my will to believe. And at that birthday dinner, when she smiled as she gave our daughter her gift, it was as if the entire past shattered, revealing how wrong I had been about what truly bound us together. The house was immaculate that night. Soft lights reflected in the crystal glasses, the scent of fresh flowers filled the air, and instrumental music played in the background, creating the perfect setting for a celebration of love. I observed every detail, the carefully set table, the rows of candles, the cake with the golden inscription. 10 years together. It was meant to be a special night, a memory we would cherish. Our closest friends and some family members were there. Everyone was smiling, toasting, taking photos, laughing at the old stories that always resurfaced at these gatherings. I was smiling too, even without understanding the silent weight that hung over the atmosphere. My wife seemed radiant, but there was something different in her gaze, something distant, too controlled. When dessert was served, she stood up, holding a glass of champagne. The sound of conversation ceased, and everyone turned their attention to her. She began to speak about the meaning of love, about the cycles of life, and about new beginnings. Beautiful words, but they seemed more like a closing speech than a celebratory one. Then came the moment no one expected. She picked up the microphone and said with a confident smile, "This trip is for our daughter, who deserves the world." A spontaneous round of applause echoed through the room. Our daughter was in shock for a moment, then jumped for joy, hugging her mother gratefully. I, beside them, tried to disguise the discomfort that rose like a lump in my throat. I smiled, that automatic smile of someone trying to hide their pain so as not to spoil the mood. But inside something didn't add up. Why was that surprise only for our daughter? Why wasn't I part of this family gift? And why, while everyone was applauding, did my wife avoid making eye contact with me? The sound of laughter seemed distant. Everything around me blurred for a moment, as if time had stopped just for me. It was in that inner silence that I realized something about that celebration was wrong, profoundly wrong, and I still had no idea what I was about to discover. After the announcement, the hall filled again with voices, toasts, and laughter, but to me the sound seemed distant, muffled, as if I were submerged in an aquarium of silence. With each glance I cast at my wife, I noticed something different. She avoided my eyes, she talked to everyone but me. She touched our daughter's hand, hugged the guests, but passed by me as if I were just another face in the crowd. I tried to get closer, searching for a gesture, a word, any sign that this moment still belonged to us in some way, but there was nothing. No affection, no genuine smile, just the elegant coldness of someone rehearsing a perfect play. The party went on, but inside me, a discomfort grew, a bitter feeling of exclusion. I remember a specific moment. We were taking a family photo. I put my arm around her, and she subtly stepped back, keeping her smile only for the camera. It was there, in that small movement, that something broke inside me. People saw a happy couple, but I saw the abyss. She laughed with her friends, told jokes, talked about travel plans, and every word seemed carefully chosen to exclude my presence. I watched, trying to understand. Where did we go wrong? How could a love that had endured years of struggle and sacrifice now turn into indifference? With each passing minute, the distance between us grew, not physical, but emotional. It was as if she had decided to erase me, little by little, in front of everyone. And the cruelest thing of all is that no one noticed. To others, we were the picture of harmony, but inside I was imploding. At the end of the evening, as the guests said their goodbyes and my wife smiled, I felt a pain that didn't come from harsh words, but from what was left unsaid, a silence so deafening it felt like a scream. And that's when I realized that gift wasn't for our daughter. It was a message for me, a cold, calculated message, as clear as the crystal of the glasses on the table. Something was coming to an end, and she had already decided to begin without me. That night seemed endless. When everyone said goodbye and the house fell silent, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared into space. My wife slept beside me, serene, as if nothing had happened. I, on the other hand, had a mind ablaze. Every gesture she made during dinner replayed in my head like a slow-motion film. The restrained smile, the lack of touch, the coldness disguised as elegance. None of it made sense. Why didn't she include me in the surprise, I thought? Why did this trip seem more like an individual prize than a family celebration? With each unanswered question, the weight on my chest increased. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a misunderstanding, but my intuition whispered otherwise. Something was being plotted, and I was missing out. I got up, walked through the dark house, observing the portraits hanging on the wall. The photos that once represented moments of happiness now seemed like memories of a time that would never return. In each image I saw a more confident smile of mine, a closer look from her, and I realized how far we had drifted apart without me even noticing. I lay down again, but sleep wouldn't come. The clock struck 3 in the morning when the doubts turned into a whirlwind. Is she planning something? Is she tired of me? Or is there someone else already? The questions echoed like thunder inside my mind. At one point I thought about waking her and talking, but the fear of what I might hear stopped me. I remained quiet, listening only to the insistent ticking of the clock, a cruel reminder that time was passing and I was losing something I didn't even know how to get back. When the sun began to rise, I no longer had any answers, only one certainty. That night had changed everything. Something was breaking between us, something I might not be able to fix. And deep down, I knew the gift wasn't just a gesture. It was the beginning of a truth that would soon come to light. The following morning dawned grey and the air felt heavier than usual. The coffee cooled in my cup as I stared out the window, trying to organize the whirlwind of thoughts from the previous night. My wife left early, saying she had appointments, and the house fell into an almost unsettling silence. It was at that moment that an old memory surfaced, like a flash. My father's will. It didn't make sense at first glance. Why did that come to mind right now? I hadn't even thought about this subject in years, but something inside me insisted, a silent, almost spiritual voice saying, "Go back to that document. There's something you've forgotten." I went up to the attic, where we kept boxes of old papers. The smell of dust and the creaking of the wood under my feet created an atmosphere of mystery. I rummaged through folders, envelopes, and files marked with old dates. Among so many mementos, I found an aged brown folder with my father's name handwritten on it. My heart raced. I sat on the floor and carefully opened the envelope. The first few pages were familiar: the division of assets, the lawyer's signatures, the formal clauses. But as I turned the pages, something caught my eye. A handwritten note, in blue ink in the corner of the paper. The granddaughter's inheritance rights remain valid as long as her father's marriage is active. I read and reread that sentence several times. It was a conditional clause, something I had completely forgotten. A safeguard, perhaps, or a message my father wanted to leave. At that moment, everything began to make sense. The distance from my wife, the rush to buy gifts for our daughter, the international trip. My body went cold. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fell into place. It was as if she knew about the clause and was planning something to ensure that, when the time was right, everything would be in her favor. I closed the envelope slowly, my hands trembling. What had once seemed like a simple memento was now a dangerous revelation. This was no longer just a forgotten document. It was the key to understanding what was really happening. And on that day, I realized the game had changed. My father's will wasn't just about inheritance. It was about loyalty, and about how much people are capable of hiding behind a smile. My gaze remained fixed on that clause for long minutes, as if each word carried the weight of a sentence. The granddaughter's inheritance rights remain valid as long as her father's marriage is active. That sentence sounded innocent at first reading, but now, after everything that had happened, it seemed like a hidden confession. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and the memory of the previous night came rushing back. My wife's calculated smile, the trip granted only to our daughter, the gaze that avoided mine. It was as if she was celebrating something I didn't yet know, and then everything made sense. The trip wasn't a gift. It was the beginning of a plan. A cold, meticulous plan prepared for the moment the marriage ended, and she left the scene with everything she could secure for her daughter. But there was a detail she perhaps didn't know. That clause conditioned everything on the existence of our marriage. If she left me, the inheritance would disappear along with the dream she was nurturing. A chill ran through my body. I knew her well enough to understand that nothing in her life was by chance. I remembered subtle conversations, seemingly harmless comments, about how love changes, about how people need freedom to rediscover themselves. At the time, I thought they were just venting. Now, I saw that they were rehearsals for a carefully planned separation. I picked up the will and reread every line, trying to find loopholes, to understand the legal terms. The more I read, the clearer it became that my father had somehow foreseen something like this. It was as if he wanted to protect me, and now his precaution was becoming the only barrier between me and the destruction of my family. I closed the document and held it against my chest. I felt a mixture of anger and disappointment. Anger at being deceived, at not having seen the signs. Disappointment at realizing that the love of my life might have turned me into nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. At that moment, there was no doubt. She was preparing the ground to get rid of me, and ironically, my father's will, something I never thought would matter again, would now be the invisible thread that reveals the whole truth. From that point on, my view of her changed. What was once love became suspicion. What was once silence turned into alert. I knew I needed to act calmly, observe, understand how far she was willing to go. Because one thing was certain, her game was underway, and I had finally read the rules. In the days that followed, the house became a stage for appearances. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The smiles, the smell of coffee in the morning, the casual conversations about our daughter's school. But behind every simple gesture, there was a new layer of tension. I now saw every movement with different eyes. My wife was happier than ever. She talked about the trip to Paris as if it were a lifelong dream. She spent hours on the computer, researching hotels, itineraries, winter clothes, and extra tickets, in case we needed to change flights. Every detail was planned with almost professional precision. And the more she talked, the clearer it became that this trip wasn't just about tourism, it was about transition. I watched her in silence, feigning disinterest, hiding the turmoil within me. I learned to measure my words, to control my tone of voice, to act as if nothing had changed, because I knew one wrong move and she might realize I had discovered everything. Meanwhile, our daughter was ecstatic. She could barely contain her excitement, already talking about buying a new suitcase, learning a few phrases in French, and posting photos of the Eiffel Tower. She had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. To her, it was just a lovely surprise from her mother, a reward for good grades, a gift of love, and that hurt more than anything. There were times when I almost gave in to the urge to confront my wife. I wanted to ask her directly, "Why are you doing this? What do you really intend to do?" But the fear of destroying everything at once kept me silent. Instead, I observed. And the more I observed, the more the truth revealed itself between the lines. I noticed how she avoided talking about their future together, how she steered clear of any subject involving family plans. She was disconnecting herself, step by step, while constructing a new narrative where I didn't exist. The nights grew long, and the silence between us was almost palpable. We slept side by side, but it felt like an ocean lay between us. Sometimes she would turn her back, the glow of her phone illuminating her face as she typed messages I couldn't see, and with each touch of the screen, I felt my heart clench. Still, I remained calm, because time was on my side, and when the right moment came, I would know what to do. The tension was unbearable, a taut rope about to snap. I didn't know how or when, but I felt the confrontation was inevitable, and when he arrived, there would be no more masks, only the naked, raw, and painful truth. Time passed slowly, as if each day were a test of endurance. I observed everything with calculated coldness, while she believed she was in control, and it was in that silence that I found the strength I needed. There would be no arguments, no scandals, no forced tears. I would choose another path, the path of silent truth, of justice without hatred. That week, while she dreamed of packed suitcases and plane tickets, I went to the office of the lawyer who had handled my father's will. I took the original document with me and asked for it to be updated. I wanted to ensure that our daughter's inheritance was protected, not under the shadow of a broken marriage, but under the light of integrity. I explained every detail to the lawyer. I asked that it be recorded that, regardless of separations or disputes, our daughter would always have what was rightfully hers. But I added something more, something that made the true purpose of that gesture clear. Loyalty would be the only non-transferable asset. While she dreamed of the perfect trip, I was writing a new chapter of the story, one in which love wouldn't be manipulated or used as a bargaining chip. And on the day she finally told me she was going to take some time to rethink things, I just smiled. "I understand," I replied calmly. "I just want you to know that while you were dreaming about the trip, I had already secured our daughter's future and made clear the true value of loyalty." The silence that followed was deafening. She looked at me, surprised, trying to understand what I meant. I didn't give details. I didn't need to. She knew. At that moment, I realized something liberating. I didn't need to win. I just needed to remain true to my principles. The love that once united us deserved to end with dignity, even if the pain was still there. She left a few days later carrying suitcases and empty promises. I stayed, slowly rebuilding what was left. And when our daughter returned from her trip, full of stories and with a sparkle in her eyes, I realized that, despite everything, I had made the right choice. Because sometimes justice isn't about shouting or punishing. It's act wisely, let time reveal everything, and remain at peace. And at that moment I understood that my father's will wasn't about material possessions. It was about values. And that legacy, yes, would never be lost. Time passed, and with it came the calm and clarity that only distance brings. The house, once full of voices, now held a serene silence. Not the same silence that hurt, but the kind that heals. Little by little, I learned to understand that not every loss is a punishment. Sometimes it's just life making room for something more genuine. I look back and see every detail of that story with a new perspective. The pain, the doubt, the fear, all were silent teachers. I discovered that love, when it's real, doesn't need to be proven with expensive gifts, trips, or speeches. It shows itself in simple actions, in faithfulness when no one is watching, and in the courage to remain fair even when life becomes unfair. Today I understand that my father's will was never just a piece of paper with clauses and signatures. It was a lesson in disguise, a reminder that true value lies not in possessions, but in integrity. He foresaw that there would be times when character would be tested, and that only those who remained steadfast in truth would inherit something truly eternal. My wife went her way, and I went mine, without hatred, without revenge, only with the certainty that every choice brings its own consequences. Our daughter, innocent amidst all of this, remains the link that reminds me of what truly matters: pure love, the kind that seeks no advantage, that doesn't pretend, that simply is. Today, I understand that some gifts don't come wrapped in paper but in intentions, and when love ends, character is what remains. Have you ever noticed a gesture that spoke louder than 1,000 words? Share your story in the comments and share this video with those who need to open their eyes before it's too late.